Hey, welcome back. I've been planning to make videos discussing about art fundamentals for a long time. But, life happens, so I set it aside. But I think it's time to break my laziness, so today I will be teaching you everything I know about art fundamentals. I can't stress enough the importance of learning art fundamentals because not only it will help you create pleasing illustrations, but knowing and mastering composition can, establish you as a more matured and professional artist. There are so many areas to tackle about the basics of art, and it might take long hours to do it in one sitting. Also, I think it's not a good idea to feed you with so much information in one video. So I decided to discuss and focus only on one topic every video. So this is going to be a series, and if this is something that you are looking forward to learn, be sure to hit the subscribe button because I will be uploading the next topic of this series very soon. And today, this is our first part. I will be discussing all about depth. Specifically, how you can give depth to your illustration or drawing or painting. One of the most common way of showing illusion of depth in a drawing is by creating the foreground, middle ground, and background layers. When you're making illustrations, especially landscape or environment art, it's important to have these three layers present. The reason this technique works is because how each layer give our eyes different experience. For example, the foreground element allows the viewer to be present inside the picture. It's like we are giving the viewer a chance to step into that place to actually experience it. But if a picture only have a foreground element, the viewer won't have any reason to stay into that place because there's nothing more to see other than the foreground, of course. So eventually it can become boring and flat. That's why a picture without a proper distinction of these three layers is, it looks boring and looks flat. But if you add a middle ground to the picture, you are giving the viewer another space and another reason to move and wander their eyes. The same goes with the background layer. It gives the viewer extended space and depth inside the picture. Here we can clearly see that this painting is composed of the foreground, the middle ground, and the background, and it did a very good job in conveying a sense of space. Overlapping is a composition technique where objects in a drawing overlap each other, to help create the illusion of depth and space. When you place an object slightly over one another, it helps the viewer's eyes to see and perceive distance between those objects. It is a much more convincing method of creating depth when you apply it to the foreground, the middle ground, and the background elements that we discussed earlier in number 1. The overlapping technique also shows which object is dominant or subordinate, and it not only helps create the illusion of depth, but it also emphasizes which is the most important element in a drawing. If we take a look at this painting, we can see that this is composed of the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. But the depth is more convincing because these elements in the foreground, these trees and the plants, overlaps and is more dominant than the middle ground and the background. Same goes with the middle ground. This house and the tree overlaps the mountain in the background, and it did a very good job in telling the viewers that the mountain is farther than the house and this bridge. Another example is this painting. The garden flowers overlaps the land and the houses in the middle ground, and the middle ground overlaps the mountains in the background. Overlapping is fairly easy to do, honestly, but there is one thing we need to avoid when doing this technique, and that is making tangents. Basically, tangents happen when two objects such as lines or shape touch each other but they do not overlap. It's like they are kissing. So the reason we need to avoid this is because it breaks the illusion of depth and space. It tends to flatten out the composition and it makes the object appear on the same space, and we don't want to do that because we are creating space, right? Imagine we are going to draw a landscape and we start with this mountain. If we want to add depth to this, we can use the first and the second technique that we discussed earlier. Simple, right? But it is not quite the result that we are looking for. Even though we have overlapping objects, the whole drawing still feels flat and there seems to be no space for us to, to breathe and to wonder. And this is because it lacks atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective is a technique of creating the illusion of depth in a drawing by changing the colors of the objects we see in the distance. It means that as an object goes further away into our view, we see that object with reduced details and the value of the objects decreases and the color becomes less saturated. Also, objects in the distance appear to have a much cooler temperature, so they become something like more of a bluish color. This painting is a gorgeous example of using atmospheric perspective in a very masterful way. The foreground has a lot of details in it, from the rocky mountain to the lake. And as we move forward to the middle ground, the details are now less noticeable. But still, there is enough that we can see. Also, the overall value decreases and the color become less saturated, and it's starting to be more like blue mountain, like bluish mountain. Same goes with the background. There are less details compared to the middle ground, and the value in the color decreases as it recedes from our point of view. And one thing that I notice here is that in between the middle ground and the background, there are clouds that seems to divide the two mountains. And that additional element really heightens the illusion of depth in this painting. It's really good. By adding clouds or maybe a mist or a fog, it makes the whole composition more spacious and the depth is more realistic. Another technique to add depth to our drawing is by using linear perspective. It's one of the most basic and common technique that artists use to convey a sense of space and realism in their work. Basically, how it works is it makes parallel lines appear to meet in the distance. It is like creating a pathway that leads our eyes into the vanishing point on the horizon. This technique is very effective because that is how our eyes see the world around us. It's basically what we see every day. When we are walking on the street, driving down the road, or walking in a hallway, we tend to see that the object that is closer to us appear larger, while the object further from us, it appears to be getting smaller as they move away. Usually we can create linear perspective through natural structure like rivers or a pathway of trees, but we can also create it through man-made structure like roads, buildings, and bridges. One of the most famous paintings that use linear perspective to convey depth is The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. Of course, you know it. We can see here that the room was constructed using linear perspective to convey the sense of depth. It's also interesting to note that the vanishing point falls exactly on Jesus' head, emphasizing that he is the focal point in this painting. So, as you can see, this technique doesn't only create a more believable environment, but it is also an effective method of leading the viewer's eyes to the most important subject in our drawing or painting. So yeah, that's it. That's the first part of this Art Fundamental series. Of course, this is not the only technique to create depth in your drawing, but I believe this is enough for you to start using this method. And I'm confident that when you master this technique, when you start applying this, you can always create a more realistic and believable drawing. I want to thank you for tuning in and watching this video until the end, and for supporting this humble channel that I have. If you think this gives value to you, please don't forget to like this video, share it to other people, and hit the subscribe button since I will be uploading more videos like this regularly. And also, you can turn on the notification bell icon so you will be notified whenever I upload a video. Again, thank you so much and see you in part 2. Take care.